What if the key to unlocking a lifetime of secrets was not hidden in a dusty attic or a forgotten safe, but worn in plain sight, a simple piece of jewelry against the skin of an unsuspecting waitress? For one young woman, whose life was a daily battle for survival, a single glance at a portrait in a billionaire's penthouse would not just change her circumstances. It would rewrite her entire existence. This is a story about a tarnished silver locket, a truth buried for over 2 decades, and a test of character so profound it could either shatter a family's legacy or finally make it whole. It is a story that asks us to believe that even in the face of overwhelming odds, the quiet strength of integrity is more powerful than any fortune, and that the bonds of family, once forged, can never truly be broken. Elara Vance moved through the greasy air of the Midnight Mug Diner with a grace that defied her exhaustion. At 26, her life was a repeating loop of cracked vinyl booths, the clatter of cheap ceramic, and the lingering smell of burnt coffee. Each shift was a tightrope walk between paying the rent on her tiny apartment and affording the ever-increasing cost of her mother's medication. Her mother, Lena, was the quiet, gentle center of her world, a woman whose body was failing, but whose spirit remained a soft, flickering candle in the drafty corners of their life. The illness was a thief, stealing not just Lena's health, but their future, one exorbitant medical bill at a time. Despite the crushing weight, Elara's kindness was a stubborn, unyielding thing. She'd offer a free coffee to a homeless man shivering by the door, listen patiently to the lonely ramblings of the diner's elderly regulars, and just last week, had chased a businessman 2 blocks in the rain to return the wallet he'd dropped, earning a dismissive grunt for her trouble. She did it not for thanks, but because it was the right thing to do. It was who she was. It was who her mother had raised her to be. For the past month, an old man had become one of those regulars. He was unassuming, dressed in a simple tweed coat and a worn flat cap that shadowed his eyes. He would sit in the corner booth, order black coffee, and simply watch. He never spoke much, but his eyes, a startlingly clear blue, seemed to see everything. The way Elara winced when her back ached, the gentle way she refilled another customer's cup, the worn-out soles of her shoes. The first time he came in, he left a $100 bill for a $2 coffee. Thinking it a terrible mistake, Elara had run out after him. "Sir, you forgot your change," she had called out, breathless. He had simply turned, a faint, sad smile touching his lips. "It's not a mistake, young lady. It's an appreciation." He did it every time he came in, and each time, Elara's protests were met with the same quiet insistence. The money was a lifeline, a miraculous reprieve that paid for a new prescription or kept the power on for another month. She knew nothing about him, not even his name, but she was profoundly grateful. One rainy Tuesday, as the diner was closing, he approached her. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice a low, cultured rumble that seemed out of place in the humble diner. "I have a proposition for you. Private catering job. Just for one evening. The pay would be substantial." Elara hesitated, a flicker of suspicion warring with her desperation. "I'm just a waitress, sir. I don't know much about private catering. Your only duty would be to serve coffee and a small meal. In my home, I will pay you $5,000 for 3 hours of your time." The number hung in the air, electric and impossible. $5,000. It was more than she made in 3 months. It was enough to cover her mother's medical bills for the rest of the year. It was a sum that could give them breathing room, a moment of peace in a life of constant struggle. The risk felt small compared to the reward. "Okay," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I'll do it." The next evening, a sleek black car, silent as a shadow, picked her up from her run-down apartment building. It drove her through the glittering heart of the city to a place she'd only ever seen in magazines. Sterling Tower, a monument of glass and steel that pierced the clouds. The elevator ascended in a silent, breathtaking rush, opening directly into a penthouse that was less an apartment and more a private kingdom. The floors were polished marble, the furniture was stark and modern, and the floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a panoramic view of the city lights, a sprawling galaxy of human ambition. The old man was waiting for her, Here, in his own environment, he was transformed. The simple tweed coat was gone, replaced by a perfectly tailored suit. The humble demeanor was still there, but it was now underpinned by an aura of immense power and profound loneliness. He was Arthur Sterling, the reclusive billionaire owner of the tower and the vast corporate empire it represented. "Thank you for coming, Miss Vance," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous space. "The kitchen is this way. Please just prepare the coffee. I will handle the rest." Alara, feeling small and out of place, nodded and made her way to a kitchen that looked like it belonged in a five-star restaurant. As she worked, her hands trembling slightly, she couldn't help but let her eyes wander into the adjoining study. It was dominated by a single, massive oil painting above a cold marble fireplace. It was a portrait of a woman, breathtakingly beautiful, with warm, intelligent eyes and a smile that held a hint of mischief. She was adorned in a simple, elegant gown, but Alara's gaze was drawn to the piece of jewelry around her neck. A stunning silver locket, shaped like a stylized sun, with a brilliant diamond sparkling at its center. A sharp, involuntary gasp escaped Alara's lips. Her hand flew to her own neck, to the cheap chain hidden beneath the collar of her uniform. There, resting against her skin, was its twin. A small, tarnished silver locket, shaped in the very same design, a gift from her mother so many years ago. It was her most treasured possession, and it was identical to the one in the portrait. Arthur Sterling, who had been watching her from the doorway, saw the movement. He saw the color drain from her face and the look of utter disbelief in her eyes. The carefully constructed wall of his composure finally cracked, and a deep, guttural sob broke from his chest. He stumbled forward, his eyes locked on the small, silver shape her fingers were tracing. Tears, raw and unchecked, streamed down his weathered face as he stared at the young waitress, his world tilting on its axis. The past, which he had thought long buried, had just walked into his home. The sound of Arthur Sterling's grief was a raw, shocking thing in the tomb-like silence of the penthouse. It wasn't the quiet weeping of an old man, but the wrenching, heartbroken sobs of someone who had just witnessed a ghost. Alara stood frozen, her hand still clutching the locket at her throat, its familiar, worn edges a stark contrast to the opulence surrounding her. She felt like an intruder, a witness to a private agony she couldn't possibly comprehend. "Sir? Mr. Sterling? Are you all right?" she asked, her voice soft with concern. He stumbled towards a leather armchair and sank into it, burying his face in his hands. His broad shoulders shook. After a long moment, he looked up, his piercing blue eyes red-rimmed and filled with a desperate, searching light. "The locket," he rasped, his voice thick with emotion. "The one you are wearing. Where did you get it?" Alara's mind raced. This wasn't just a coincidence. The intensity of his reaction told her that this simple piece of jewelry was something far more significant than she could have imagined. She swallowed hard, her own heart beginning to pound in her chest. "It was a gift," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "From my mother. She gave it to me on my 16th birthday. She said it was from a time of hope." "Your mother?" he pressed, leaning forward, his gaze fixed on her. "What is her name?" "Lena. Lena Vance." Arthur's eyes closed, as if the name was a physical blow. He whispered it to himself, "Lena," tasting the syllables as if they were a long-forgotten memory. He took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to regain his composure. He pointed a trembling finger towards the magnificent portrait above the fireplace. "That woman," he began, his voice cracking, "was my wife, my Isabella. She passed away 10 years ago. That locket she is wearing, I had it made for her. It was a one-of-a-kind piece. There isn't another one like it in the world. Or so I believed." He looked from the portrait to Alara, a storm of confusion, sorrow, and a dawning, impossible hope in his eyes. He saw now that it wasn't just the locket. There was something in Alara's face, in the gentle curve of her smile and the quiet determination in her eyes, that reminded him so fiercely of his lost love. I don't understand, Alara whispered, feeling as though the marble floor had dropped out from under her. My mother, she's a seamstress. We've never had much. A piece like that. She gestured to the painting, to the brilliant diamond winking in the firelight. It's impossible. Nothing is impossible, Arthur said, his voice gaining a sudden, urgent strength. Only hidden, he stood up, his movements slow and deliberate, and walked over to a heavy mahogany desk. He fumbled with a set of keys, his hands still shaking, and unlocked a small, ornate box. He returned to her, holding it out. I need you to help me, Miss Vance. I need you to help me understand. Alara looked from his pleading eyes to the box, a sense of unreality washing over her. This was the world of the ultra-rich, a world of secrets and mysteries she had no place in. And yet, she was standing in the middle of it, holding the key. He saw the hesitation and fear on her face. He saw the exhaustion she tried so hard to hide. And in that moment, he made a decision that would bind their fates together forever. I will make you an offer, he said, his tone shifting from emotional to direct, the voice of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. I want you to work for me, not as a caterer, as a consultant. I want you to talk to me. Tell me everything you know about your mother, about her life, about where that locket came from. Help me piece together this puzzle. He paused, letting the weight of his next words sink in. In return, I will not only pay you the $5,000 for tonight, but I will provide you with a salary of $200,000 a year. And more importantly, he added, his gaze softening with empathy, I have seen the way you struggle. I know about your mother's illness. Effective immediately, I will cover all of her medical expenses. Every doctor, every treatment, every medication. She will receive the best care money can buy. You will not have to worry about a single bill ever again. Alara's breath caught in her throat. The offer was staggering, beyond the scope of her wildest dreams. It wasn't just money. It was freedom. It was the end of the sleepless nights spent worrying about bills, the end of the constant, grinding anxiety that had been her companion for years. It was the promise of proper care for her mother, a chance for Lena to live without pain. It was everything she had ever prayed for. But it was also terrifying. This powerful, grieving man was asking her to dredge up a past her mother had always kept shrouded in sadness and silence. What secrets would she uncover? What pain would she be forced to confront? She looked up at the portrait of Isabella, at the kind eyes that seemed to be watching her. Then she thought of her own mother, her gentle face etched with worry even in her sleep. The choice was clear. Her own fear was a small price to pay for her mother's well-being. Yes, Alara said, her voice firm, imbued with a resolve she didn't know she possessed. I accept. A profound sense of relief washed over Arthur Sterling's face. For the first time that evening, a genuine, albeit fragile, smile touched his lips. He knew he was placing his hope in a stranger, grasping at a thread of connection that might lead nowhere. But looking at the earnest young woman before him, with her mother's locket around her neck and his wife's eyes in her face, he felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in a decade, hope. The long, silent winter of his grief was finally beginning to thaw. Alara's new life began the very next day. The black car returned to her apartment building, this time not for a one-off job, but as her personal transport. The transition was jarring. She left her small, cluttered apartment, filled with the familiar sense of old books and her mother's lavender sachets, and was whisked away to the sterile, silent opulence of Sterling Tower. Felt like stepping from the real world into a dream. Her first task was a bittersweet one. She went to the hospital where her mother was staying. Armed with the authority of Arthur Sterling's name and an unlimited expense account, she arranged for Lena to be moved to the best private suite, attended by the city's top specialists. Lena, weak but lucid, looked at her daughter with bewildered eyes. Alara, honey, how? She whispered, her hand frail in Alara's. We can't afford this. Don't worry about it, Mama, Alara said, stroking her mother's hair. Everything is taken care of. You just focus on getting better. She couldn't bring herself to explain the full, bizarre story yet. It was too much too soon. For now, it was enough to see the lines of pain on her mother's face soften with relief. Her days at the penthouse fell into a strange, quiet rhythm. She and Arthur would sit in his vast study, the portrait of Isabella watching over them like a silent guardian. Their conversations were hesitant at first, like two people learning a new language. He was a man used to the cold, hard facts of balance sheets and stock prices, not the murky, emotional waters of memory and loss. "Tell me about your mother." He would begin each session, his voice gentle. "What was she like when you were growing up?" Alara painted a portrait of Lena in careful, loving strokes. She described a woman of immense quiet strength, who could make a feast out of next to nothing and who could mend any tear, in fabric or in spirit, with her skilled hands. She spoke of her mother's inexplicable sadness, a deep, abiding melancholy that would sometimes settle over her for days, a shadow that no amount of love could seem to dispel. "She never spoke of her childhood," Alara explained, turning her own tarnished locket over in her fingers. "Whenever I asked about her family, about my father, she would just get this distant look in her eyes. She'd say the past was best left where it was. All she ever told me was that she was an orphan." Arthur listened intently, absorbing every detail. In turn, he began to open up about Isabella. He spoke of her fierce intelligence, her passion for art, and her secret acts of charity. He described how she would sneak out of society galas to deliver food to homeless shelters, using her privilege to help those who had none. "She came from nothing, you see," Arthur said, his gaze drifting to the portrait. "She was an orphan, too. Her adoptive parents were wealthy but cold. They gave her every material thing but offered little warmth. She always felt a part of her was missing. There was a year long before I met her when she was a young woman. She disappeared. Her adoptive family said she ran away with a bad crowd. When she returned, she was different, quieter, guarded. She never, ever spoke of that time. The puzzle pieces were there, scattered between them, but they didn't yet fit. They focused their attention on the one solid clue they had, the lockets." Arthur, with a reverence that was heartbreaking to watch, retrieved Isabella's locket from the ornate box. He laid it on the polished desk beside Alara's. Side by side, the connection was undeniable. Isabella's was crafted from platinum, polished to a mirror shine, the central diamond catching the light and fracturing it into 1,000 tiny rainbows. Alara's was humble silver, its surface dulled and scratched with age, its design identical but unadorned. They were a study in contrasts, like two sisters separated at birth, one raised in luxury, the other in hardship. "I had it designed myself," Arthur murmured, tracing the sunburst pattern on his wife's locket with a fingertip. "I worked with a jeweler in Italy. He swore to me it was a unique design." "Maybe he lied?" Alara suggested softly. "Perhaps," Arthur conceded. "But there's more." He picked up a jeweler's loupe from his desk and carefully examined the clasp on Isabella's locket. He worked at it for a moment before a tiny, almost invisible panel sprang open on the back. He handed the loupe to Alara. "Look!" Alara pressed her eye to the lens, her heart hammering. Inside, etched in script so small it was barely legible, was a message. It was a message that changed everything. "For my sister, my other half, may you find your light." Alara looked up at Arthur, her eyes wide with shock. "Sister." A wave of understanding and profound sadness washed over Arthur's face. "Isabella never told me she had a sister. Her adoptive parents insisted she was an only child." The implication was immediate, electrifying. It hung in the air between them, a fragile, earth-shattering possibility. Lena and Isabella, two orphans, two lockets, one secret sisterhood. The narrative that had defined both their lives, that they were alone in the world, was beginning to crumble. The sadness that had clung to Lena for as long as Alara could remember suddenly had a name, a face. It was the sorrow of a lost sister, a bond severed by forces they were only just beginning to comprehend. The investigation had just begun, but they had found their first critical clue. Isabella had a sister, and all signs pointed to the gentle, unassuming seamstress lying in a hospital bed across town. The revelation that Lena was likely Isabella's long-lost sister sent a jolt of energy through Arthur Sterling. For the first time in a decade, the reclusive billionaire had a purpose beyond simply managing his grief and his fortune. He became a man possessed, directing his formidable resources towards uncovering the truth of the past. Meanwhile, Alara's daily presence at Sterling Tower, once a quiet arrangement, started to attract attention. Whispers echoed through the corporate floors about the mysterious young woman who had the ear of the old man. This unwelcome attention soon coalesced into a single, formidable obstacle: Marcus Thorne, Arthur's nephew, and the acting CEO of Sterling Industries, was a man who wore his ambition like a well-tailored suit. He was sharp, ruthless, and had spent years positioning himself as the sole heir to the Sterling Empire. He viewed his uncle's grief as a manageable corporate liability, but this new obsession with a common waitress was something else entirely. It was a threat. He arranged to be at the penthouse one afternoon, arriving unannounced. Alara had just finished briefing Arthur on her mother's improving condition when Marcus strode into the study, a look of thinly veiled contempt on his handsome face. "Uncle Arthur," he said, his voice a smooth, condescending purr. "I was concerned. The board has been asking questions. They hear you've taken on a new consultant." He let his eyes drift over to Alara, dismissing her with a single, calculating glance. "Marcus," Arthur's voice was cold steel, "this is a private matter. Everything you do is a corporate matter, as you well know." Marcus countered, not backing down. He turned his full attention to Alara, his smile never reaching his eyes. "So, you're the one who has my uncle so captivated. A waitress from the Midnight Mug. A truly remarkable ascent." Alara felt a hot flush of anger and shame. She stood her ground, meeting his gaze directly. "Mr. Sterling has been very generous. I'm helping him with some family research." Marcus let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Family research? Is that what we're calling it now? Let's be frank, Miss Vance, is it? I don't know what your game is, but it ends now. My uncle is a grieving man. He is vulnerable. Whatever sob story you've sold him, I assure you, I won't be so easily fooled." He stepped closer, lowering his voice into a conspiratorial whisper, though it was loud enough for Arthur to hear. "Name your price. I will write you a check right now, for a sum that will ensure you and your family are comfortable for the rest of your lives. In return, you will walk out that door and never see my uncle again." It was a blatant, insulting attempt at a payoff, designed to humiliate her and prove his point. He expected her to be greedy, to reveal her true colors as a gold digger. But Marcus had fundamentally misjudged her. Alara's life had been a testament to her integrity, a quality he couldn't possibly comprehend. She lifted her chin, her voice ringing with a clarity and strength that surprised even herself. "My integrity is not for sale, Mr. Thorne. I'm not here for your uncle's money. I'm here for the truth. Something tells me you wouldn't understand the value of that." The directness of her refusal, the quiet power in her stance, wiped the smirk from Marcus's face. He was momentarily stunned, and used to being defied so completely. Before he could retort, Arthur, who had been watching the exchange with a thunderous expression, rose to his full height. "That is enough, Marcus," he boomed, his voice resonating with the authority he so rarely used. "You will apologize to Miss Vance at once." "Apologize?" Marcus scoffed, his arrogance returning. "For protecting this family from a con artist? Uncle, can't you see what she is? She's preying on you. The only predator in this room is you." Arthur shot back, his eyes blazing with a fury Marcus had not seen in years. "You, with your constant scheming and your obsession with an inheritance you have not yet earned. Alara has shown more decency and honor in the last week than you have in your entire life. Now get out. You are no longer welcome in my home until you learn to show some respect." The dismissal was absolute. Marcus stared at his uncle, then at Alara, his face a mask of cold fury. He had come to extinguish a small fire and had instead poured gasoline on it. He saw now that Alara wasn't just a fleeting distraction. She was a genuine threat to his position. He turned on his heel without another word, the sharp click of his expensive shoes on the marble floor echoing his silent declaration of war. As he left, Alara knew she had not just refused a bribe. She had made a powerful and ruthless enemy. The search for the truth was no longer just a private journey of discovery. It was now a battle. The confrontation with Marcus, while unsettling, had an unforeseen effect. It solidified the bond between Alara and Arthur. He had defended her without hesitation, choosing to trust her character over his own nephew's cynical accusations. This shared sense of purpose invigorated their search. The next step was clear. The answers they sought lay with the one person who had lived the story, Lena. Thanks to the superior medical care Arthur was providing, Lena's health had improved dramatically. The constant pain had subsided, and the fog of her illness was lifting. She was moved from the hospital to a comfortable, sunlit room in a private care facility, where Alara could visit her every day. The time had come to ask the questions Alara had always been too afraid to voice. She sat by her mother's bedside, holding her hand. The tarnished silver locket was lying on the nightstand between them. "Mama," she began gently, "I need to ask you about this, and about your past. It's important." A familiar, sad shadow passed over Lena's features. It was the same closed-off expression she had worn for years. "Alara, some things are better left alone." "I don't think this is one of them," Alara insisted softly. She took a deep breath. "Mama, did you have a sister?" The question struck Lena with the force of a physical blow. Her eyes, which had been hazy with medication and illness, snapped into sharp focus. Tears instantly welled, spilling down her cheeks. The wall she had built around her heart for decades crumbled in an instant. How did you know?" she whispered, her voice choked with a grief so old and deep it was part of her very bones. And then the story came pouring out, a torrent of pain and loss held back for a lifetime. She spoke of a childhood in a bleak, underfunded orphanage, where the only warmth she had known was the hand of her sister, Isabella. They were inseparable, two halves of a whole, promising each other they would never be parted. Isabella was the brave one, the dreamer. Lena was the quiet, steady one who anchored her. "Then the Thorpes came," Lena said, her voice trembling with the memory. "They were a wealthy couple. They wanted to adopt a child. They saw Isabella. She was so beautiful, so bright. They wanted her. But not me." Her voice broke. "They said they only had room for one. They called me less promising. They promised us we could write, that we could visit. But it was a lie. They were cruelly separated." Isabella was swept away into a world of luxury, while Lena was transferred to another, harsher institution hundreds of miles away. She wrote letter after letter, her childish scrawl filled with loneliness and love, but she never received a reply. The orphanage matron told her that Isabella had a new, better life now and had forgotten all about her poor sister. It was a wound that had never healed. "This locket?" Lena whispered, picking it up with a trembling hand. "Isabella made it for me. We found a piece of scrap silver, and she spent weeks carving it with a nail, trying to make a matching one for the cheap one she wore. She gave it to me the day before they took her. It was all I had left of her." Alara's heart ached for her mother, for the little girl who had been told she was worthless and abandoned. "Mama," she said, her own tears falling freely. "She didn't forget you. She never forgot you." Lena looked at her, confused. "What are you talking about?" This was the moment. Alara reached into her bag and pulled out a large envelope. Arthur's investigators, at her request, had retrieved a box of her mother's old belongings from storage. Inside, tucked away at the very bottom, they had found a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. Alara had opened one, and her world had tilted. She handed the bundle to her mother. "These were in your old keepsake box. I think someone kept them from you." Lena's hands shook as she untied the ribbon. The envelopes were yellowed with age, the stamps bearing the mark of a bygone era. They were all addressed to Lena, sent to the various orphanages and foster homes she had lived in. And across the front of each one, in a stark, bureaucratic hand, were the words, "Return to sender. Addressee unknown." She opened the first one. The handwriting was elegant, familiar, and full of love. It was from Isabella. "My dearest Lena," the letter began. "I miss you more than words can say. My new home is big and cold, and these people are not family. They are strangers. I ask about you every day, but they tell me to stop. They say you are fine, but I won't stop. I will never stop looking for you. You are my other half. Forever." Letter after letter told the same story. Isabella's loneliness in her new life, her frustration with her cold, controlling adoptive parents, her desperate, fruitless attempts to find her sister. The letters were a chronicle of a love that had refused to die, a testament to a bond that had been deliberately and cruelly sabotaged. Someone had intercepted every single letter, ensuring the two sisters would remain apart, each believing the other had abandoned her. The final letter was dated nearly 8 years after their separation. Isabella wrote of meeting a wonderful man, a kind and brilliant man named Arthur who saw her for who she was, not for the society girl her parents wanted her to be. And then came the final, shocking lines. "I have news, my sister. News I wish I could tell you in person. I am with child. I am going to be a mother. I am so happy, but also so afraid. The Thorpes, they are furious. They say this will ruin their plans for me. I fear what they might do. I just pray that one day I can introduce you to my child. I pray that one day we will be a family again." The lie that had defined Lena's life was shattered. Isabella had never forgotten. She had loved her, searched for her, and had wanted to share her greatest joy with her. The truth was both a profound comfort and a fresh, agonizing wound. A life of connection had been stolen from them. And as Alara read about the unborn child, a chilling new possibility began to form in her mind. A possibility so immense and terrifying that it seemed to defy belief. The mystery of the lockets was no longer just about two lost sisters. It was about a lost child as well. The discovery of Isabella's letters turned the investigation into a full-blown crusade. The narrative was no longer just about two sisters separated by a cruel twist of fate. It was about a deliberate, sustained campaign of deception. Marcus Thorne, however, was not idle. Enraged by his public dismissal from Arthur's home, he had launched his own investigation, not into the past, but into Alara. He was determined to dig up any dirt he could find to discredit her and prove to his uncle that she was the fraud he believed her to be. He found exactly what he was looking for. One morning, as Arthur and Alara were poring over old adoption records, Arthur's assistant buzzed through on the intercom, her voice strained. "Mr. Sterling, you need to see this." She sent a link to his computer. An article had just been published on the website of a notorious gossip tabloid. The headline screamed in bold, sensational letters, "Grieving billionaire's fortune at risk. Con artist waitress with criminal past seduces reclusive tycoon." The article was a masterpiece of character assassination. It painted Alara as a cunning opportunist who had targeted the vulnerable Arthur Sterling from the moment he walked into her diner. It detailed her financial struggles, twisting her desperation into calculated greed. And then came the daggers. Marcus's private investigator had unearthed 2 damaging pieces of information. The first was a sealed juvenile record showing that at 17, Alara had been arrested for shoplifting a loaf of bread and some cheese. The second was that her mother, Lena, had briefly worked as a seamstress for a textile company that was a minor competitor of a Sterling Industries subsidiary 2 decades ago. The article spun this into a narrative of corporate espionage, suggesting the Vances had a long history of targeting the Sterlings. The story was flimsy, built on half-truths and malicious innuendo, but it was explosive. The phone began to ring incessantly. The corporate board was in a panic. The carefully managed public image of Sterling Industries was being threatened by a scandal. Alara felt the blood drain from her face. Her past, her moment of youthful desperation, was being twisted into a weapon against her. She felt sick, exposed, and deeply ashamed. She looked at Arthur, expecting to see disappointment, even disgust, in his eyes. His face was a grim, unreadable mask. He ended a heated call with a board member and turned to her, the silence in the room heavy and suffocating. This was it. This was the moment he would realize Marcus was right, the moment he would throw her out and her world would come crashing down again. This was her test. "Alara," he said, his voice quiet but intense, "I am going to ask you one question, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Is any of what that article says true?" She had a choice. She could deny it, try to explain it away, minimize the damage. The temptation to hide her past shame was immense. But her mother had raised her to face the truth, no matter how ugly. And she owed this man, who had shown her such extraordinary kindness, nothing less than the complete truth. She took a deep breath and met his gaze, her own eyes clear and unwavering. "Yes," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her heart. "It's true. When I was 17, my mother was very sick for the first time. We had no money. We hadn't eaten in 2 days. I was desperate. I stole food from a grocery store. I was caught and I was arrested. It was the most shameful moment of my life, and I have regretted it every single day since." She didn't stop there. "And my mother, yes, she worked for that company for a few months. It was one of a dozen low-paying jobs she took over the years to keep a roof over our heads. She was a seamstress in the factory. She wouldn't have known the first thing about corporate espionage. We never even knew they were a competitor of yours until now." She laid her entire, vulnerable truth before him, with no excuses or justifications. She had failed. She had a record. She was exactly what the article said she was, a poor girl with a criminal past. She braced herself for his judgment, for the inevitable dismissal. Arthur stared at her for a long, silent moment. He saw no deceit in her eyes, only the painful honesty of her confession. He saw the shame she still carried for a mistake made out of desperation and love. And in that moment, he didn't see the criminal the tabloid described. He saw a reflection of his Isabella, a girl from a hard background who had done what she needed to survive. He saw the same fierce, unyielding integrity that had first drawn him to his wife. His decision was instantaneous and absolute. A slow smile spread across his face, a smile of profound respect and admiration. "Thank you, Alara," he said, his voice filled with a warmth that chased away the chill in the room. "Thank you for your honesty." He picked up the phone again, his demeanor transformed. The quiet, grieving recluse was gone, replaced by the formidable titan of industry he had once been. "Get my legal team on the line," he barked to his assistant, "and schedule a press conference for this afternoon. The gloves are off. We are going to war." Alara stared at him, stunned. He wasn't just believing her. He was fighting for her. In her greatest moment of shame, he had offered her not condemnation, but his unconditional trust. Her character had been tested by fire, and in his eyes, she had emerged unbroken. The public scandal, orchestrated by Marcus, was meant to be the final blow that would sever Alara's connection to Arthur Sterling. Instead, it became the catalyst for a full-scale assault on the past. Arthur, galvanized by Alara's honesty and enraged by his nephew's treachery, unleashed the full might of his legal and investigative teams. Their mission was no longer just to understand a family mystery, but to unearth every secret, every lie that the Thorpe family had ever buried. The investigators descended upon old records like a storm. They tracked down retired staff from the orphanages, long-forgotten clerks from the adoption agency, and former employees of the Thorpe estate. They uncovered a pattern of bribes, falsified documents, and intimidation that stretched back decades. The story that emerged was even darker than they had imagined. Isabella's adoptive parents, the Thorpes, were not just cold. They were monstrously cruel in their ambition. They had seen Isabella as an investment, a beautiful object to be polished and married off to cement their social standing. Lena was a liability, a tie to a past they wanted to erase. So they didn't just separate the sisters. They built an unbreachable wall between them, ensuring Lena was shuffled through the system, always one step behind Isabella's desperate search. They intercepted every letter, every inquiry, cultivating the lie that the sisters had forgotten each other. The breakthrough came from the archives of the Thorpe family's old law firm. A junior investigator, tasked with digging through mountains of mundane financial records, stumbled upon a sealed file labeled simply I.T. estate matter. Prying it open, he found a trove of documents that laid the entire conspiracy bare. The first was a sworn affidavit from a nurse who had been on her deathbed. She confessed that 27 years ago, she had attended the birth of Isabella Thorpe's child at a private clinic. The Thorpes had been there, their faces like stone. They had instructed her and the doctor that when Isabella woke from the difficult delivery, she was to be told the baby, a girl, had been stillborn. The nurse, paid a fortune for her silence, had been haunted by the lie ever since. Beneath the affidavit was a copy of the real birth certificate. It listed the mother as Isabella Thorpe and the father, who was not yet married to Isabella and had been kept in the dark about the pregnancy's progression, as Arthur Sterling. The baby's name was listed as Grace. The final document was the most damning of all. It was a private ledger detailing a series of cash payments. The largest payment was made to the clinic. A second set of payments was made to a young, ambitious man who had helped orchestrate the cover-up, a man who saw the baby as a threat to his own future inheritance from the Thorpes, who were his maternal grandparents. The name listed next to those payments was Marcus Thorne. And the final, smaller set of monthly payments was made to a recently fired seamstress from the Thorpe estate, a quiet, desperate woman who had been given the infant girl and a lump sum of cash, and told to disappear and raise the child as her own. The name of that seamstress was Lena Vance. The truth crashed down upon them with the force of an avalanche. Alara was not Lena's daughter. She was not Isabella's niece. She was Grace Sterling, the biological daughter of Isabella Thorpe and Arthur Sterling. Arthur sat at his desk, the documents spread before him, his body trembling with a mixture of earth-shattering grief and incandescent rage. He had lost not only his wife but a daughter he never knew he had. His entire life, the past 27 years, had been predicated on a monstrous lie. Isabella hadn't just lost a sister. She had been robbed of her own child, dying with a hole in her heart that should have been filled with love for her daughter. Alara stood by the window, looking out at the city below, but seeing nothing. Her entire identity, everything she had ever known about herself, had been obliterated. The woman she had called mother was, in fact, her aunt, the woman who had saved her and loved her as her own. The face in the portrait was not a stranger. It was her birth mother. And the grieving billionaire standing across the room, the man who had shown her such inexplicable kindness, was her father. She touched the locket at her neck. The simple silver sunburst her mother, her Aunt Lena, had told her was from a time of hope. Now she understood. It was the hope of a new life, a secret legacy passed from one sister to another. Lena hadn't just raised a child. She had protected her sister's most precious treasure. Arthur slowly rose from his chair and walked towards her. The emotional distance he had always maintained was gone, replaced by a raw, profound vulnerability. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and for the first time, he didn't just see a resemblance to Isabella. He saw his own eyes, his own blood. He saw his daughter. Grace, he whispered, the name a prayer on his lips. Tears streamed freely down his face. My daughter. Alara turned to him, her own tears blurring her vision. The name felt strange, foreign. She was Alara, but she was also Grace. She was the sum of two women's love, the mother who gave her life and the aunt who gave her a life. She stepped forward, and for the first time they embraced. It was not the hug of an employer and his consultant, but the desperate, clinging embrace of a father and daughter, two strangers bound by blood and tragedy, finding each other across a chasm of stolen years. The revelation was complete, the truth was out, and it was more shocking, more painful, and more profound than either of them could have ever prepared for. The air in the Sterling Industries boardroom was thick with tension. It was a space designed for intimidation, with its long, polished mahogany table, panoramic city views, and an atmosphere of cold, corporate power. The board members, a collection of stern, gray-suited men and women, sat in stony silence, their faces etched with concern over the burgeoning scandal. At the head of the table sat Arthur Sterling, no longer a reclusive figurehead but a commanding presence, his face set like granite. To his right sat Alara, dressed not in a waitress uniform but in a simple, elegant dress. Her composure was absolute, a quiet island of calm in a sea of corporate anxiety. Beside her was Lena, frail but resolute, her presence a testament to the truth they were about to unveil. The final guest arrived late, striding in with an air of arrogant confidence. Marcus Thorne took his seat, offering a condescending nod to his uncle. He believed this meeting was his final victory lap, the moment the board would force Arthur to sever ties with the disgraced waitress and restore order. He had no idea he was walking into his own execution. "Thank you all for coming," Arthur began, his voice low and steady, yet it carried to every corner of the room. "I know you are all concerned about the recent publicity. You are worried about the reputation of this company. Today, we are not here to discuss stock prices or quarterly reports. We are here to discuss the truth." He gestured to a large screen at the end of the room. One by one, documents appeared. The falsified adoption papers, the intercepted letters from Isabella to Lena, the nurse's sworn affidavit describing a stolen baby, the hidden birth certificate of Grace Sterling, the ledger detailing payoffs to the clinic, the staff, and to a young Marcus Thorne. A collective gasp went through the room. The board members stared, their faces a mixture of shock and dawning horror. This was not a story of a gold-digging waitress. It was a conspiracy of unimaginable cruelty. Arthur let the evidence sink in before he delivered the final, devastating blow. "For 27 years, I believed I had no children. I believed the love of my life, Isabella, died without ever having a family of her own. That was a lie. A lie constructed by the Thorpe family to control her inheritance. A lie perpetuated by my own nephew to secure his position as my heir." He turned his piercing gaze directly on Marcus. "My daughter did not die at birth. She is alive. She was raised by her loving aunt, a woman who was told her own sister had abandoned her. My daughter is sitting right here." He placed a protective hand on Alara's arm. "Her name is Alara Vance. And her name is Grace Sterling." The boardroom was utterly silent. The truth was so audacious, so cinematic, it was almost impossible to believe. But the evidence on the screen was irrefutable. Marcus leaped to his feet, his face pale with shock but twisted in a desperate sneer. "This is insane. A complete fabrication. You can't possibly believe this. This fantasy spun by a conniving waitress." He spat, pointing a trembling finger at Alara. "She has fooled you, uncle. She has fooled all of you." "Is it a fantasy, Marcus?" Arthur's voice was dangerously quiet. "Is the ledger detailing the payments you received from your grandparents for your discretion a fantasy? Is the nurse's testimony, corroborated by 2 other witnesses my team has found, a fantasy?" Cornered and exposed, Marcus's composure finally shattered. The mask of sophistication fell away, revealing the panicked, entitled man beneath. In his desperation, he made a fatal error. He resorted to the arrogant cruelty that was his true nature. "Fine," he snarled, his voice dripping with venom. "So what if it is true? I did what was necessary. My grandparents did what was necessary to protect the family name. Can you imagine the scandal if it had come out that Isabella had a child out of wedlock? A child with you before you were even married? That child," he sneered, looking at Alara with utter contempt, "was never meant to be a Sterling. She belonged in the gutter with her aunt. You should be thanking me for protecting this family's legacy from being tarnished by a waitress's daughter." The confession, born of pure arrogance, hung in the electrified air. He had admitted to everything, his contempt for Alara blinding him to the fact that he was confessing in front of the entire board, 2 corporate lawyers, and a recording device Arthur's team had discreetly activated. He had not just sealed his fate, he had immolated his entire future. The climax was not a dramatic shout, but the cold, quiet finality in Arthur Sterling's voice. "Thank you, Marcus," he said, a grim satisfaction in his tone. "That was all we needed to hear. Security will now escort you from the building. Your position as CEO is terminated, effective immediately. You are disowned. I will see to it that you are prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law." Marcus stared, his mouth agape, as two security guards entered the room. The fight drained out of him, replaced by the hollow look of utter defeat. As he was led away, his legacy turning to ash, Alara met his gaze one last time, not with triumph, but with a quiet, steely pity. His greed had cost him everything, while her integrity, the very thing he had mocked, had led her home. The fallout from the boardroom confrontation was swift and decisive. Marcus Thorne was arrested, his arrogant confession providing an open-and-shut case for the prosecution. The full weight of the Sterling legal machine descended upon him, ensuring that justice for his decades of deceit would be absolute. The tabloid that had slandered Alara, facing a lawsuit of astronomical proportions, printed a front-page retraction and a groveling apology, detailing the true story of the long-lost Sterling heir. The scandal that Marcus had hoped would destroy Alara ended up destroying him, while elevating her to a figure of public fascination and sympathy. For Alara, Arthur, and Lena, the days that followed were quiet and intensely personal. The public noise faded into the background as they focused on the delicate, beautiful work of becoming a family. Arthur officially filed the paperwork to have Alara's birth certificate amended, legally acknowledging her as his daughter, Grace Alara Sterling. He didn't want to erase the name she had grown up with, the name her aunt had given her. He wanted to honor both parts of her identity. He amended his will, naming her his sole heir and establishing a trust for Lena that would ensure she would be cared for in comfort and dignity for the rest of her life. The vast Sterling fortune, once a source of conflict and greed, was now anchored to a legacy of love and justice. One afternoon, the three of them stood together in the quiet study, looking up at the portrait of Isabella. For the first time, Alara saw not a beautiful stranger, but her mother. She saw the source of her own resilience, the kindness in her smile. Lena stood beside her, her hand in Arthur's, tears of peace streaming down her face. The sister she had mourned for a lifetime was here, in this room, her spirit alive in her daughter. "She would be so proud of you," Arthur said to Alara, his voice thick with emotion. He reached into his pocket and produced the platinum and diamond locket, Isabella's locket. "This belongs to you now." Alara took the exquisite piece of jewelry. Then, she unclasped the tarnished silver locket from her own neck, the one Lena had cherished for so long. She gently fastened it around her aunt's neck. "And this belongs to you, Mama Lena. It was always yours." The two lockets, symbols of their separate, painful journeys, were finally with their rightful owners. The hole in their lives, the missing piece that had caused so much unspoken grief, was finally filled. They were not a perfect family forged by years of shared memories, but they were a real one, forged in the fires of truth and bound by an unbreakable love. They were whole. Months later, the world saw a new side of Sterling Industries. The company, under the guidance of its newly discovered heir, launched its most ambitious project to date, the Isabella and Lena Foundation. It was a philanthropic organization with a dual mission: to provide resources for reuniting families separated by adoption or hardship, and to fund educational programs for underprivileged children, giving them the promising future Lena had been denied. Alara, now Grace Alara Sterling, stood at a podium at the Foundation's launch event. She was not the timid waitress from the Midnight Mug, nor was she a pampered socialite. She was a woman who had found her voice and her purpose. Dressed in an elegant but understated suit, she spoke with a quiet confidence that captivated the audience. She spoke of second chances, of the power of truth, and of her belief that no child should ever be made to feel less promising. In the front row, Arthur and Lena watched her, their faces beaming with pride. Arthur was no longer the city's famed recluse. He was a father, present and engaged, his eyes full of a light that had been extinguished for years. Lena, her health restored, radiated a serene joy. The three of them were a portrait of healing, a testament to the fact that it is never too late to reclaim what was lost. And so, a story that began with a simple act of kindness in a Greasy Spoon diner found its conclusion not in the acquisition of wealth, but in the creation of hope. The tarnished silver locket, once a symbol of loss and loneliness, had become a key, unlocking a legacy not of money, but of love. It reminds us that our true inheritance is not what is written in a will, but what is etched upon our hearts. The world may try to tell you who you are, but the truth of your own character will always, eventually, shine its way to the light. How many hidden connections, how many unspoken truths, lie dormant in our own lives, waiting for a single moment of recognition to change everything. If this story of family, truth, and justice touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe for more inspirational content.